Alright, we are finally getting into One Piece, and with this being my first video, I'm going to be reading a script that's formulaic over to the side here, so I'm going to be looking over here most of the time. But getting into the video, One Piece, chapter 1186. This one definitely hits very differently than most of the chapters that we have seen, especially because we are ending the Brook flashback and getting into the present time. After last chapter's gut-punching ending with Brook walking in on Princess Shuri standing over King Luffy, looking definitely very demonic with the Domi Reversey vibes that we have everywhere, we finally get the payoff on this chapter. The chapter is titled something like Once More, and it definitely delivers exactly what the title promises. We close out Brook's Asperia Kingdom flashback in brutal fashion. Then Oda flips the switch and gives us the most hyped double panel spread that we've had in recent memory. Maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but if you're watching this video, I know you're new here but may not be new to One Piece and need the catch-up. So let's break this chapter down. So moving on to the pacing and structure of the chapter. For the pacing in this chapter, excellent. Classic Oda for the slow burn then nuclear payoff formula that he does. The first half is almost entirely flashback. It feels deliberate and heavy, like any flashback that Oda does, letting the emotional weight of Brook's trauma breathe. In this chapter, we get the explanation, the betrayal, the stabbing, the immediate aftermath, and the heartbreaking realization that he repressed the whole thing for decades. It doesn't drag because every panel is dripping with pain and revelation. Then, around the midpoint, the flashback snaps back to present time, pretty cleanly, but also very abruptly. We cut back to the present with Brook talking to the crew, which gives us a nice breather and emotional processing moment. From there, it's straight into Emu and Loki fight for the final third of the chapter. The structure is pretty tight. We have the emotional backstory as that goes into the character reflection, which leads to the main plot escalation that we have, and then a very great ending that we see, as I had mentioned before. When it comes to One Piece and how Oda does the structure and pacing of most of these chapters, we definitely see a lot of difference between some fights that we've seen in the past. Doflamingo comes to mind, Katakuri comes to mind, where we're not having a lot of flashbacks or shifts to different positions while these fights are going along. Probably not as much as I think, especially with most of this stuff being very lore heavy, very end game One Piece heavy. With that being said, I could just be having a lot of recency bias, not really remembering what's going on from those because I haven't read them so recently, but that we're caught up here and we're reading these weekly, so probably have some warped image of that. But the chapter knows exactly when to hurt you and exactly when to make you hyped. Pacing wise, I'll give it a 9 out of 10. Pretty solid. It respects the flashback while still advancing the current war. Now moving on to the character components of the chapter, and this one being very Brook heavy, obviously coming off of his backstory and getting into present time. We finally see the origin of one of the scars that he had on his skull whenever we first met him. Young Brook was just a servant kid under King Kendall. He gets recognized by Mon Mayor Gro, who happens to be Gunko or Princess Shuri's biological father and a holy knight. You know, he calls him that brat with an afro. Brook never got close to Gro. Back then, he was not allowed, which is why he didn't remember him. Then the gut-wrenching part comes. Shuri, now known as Gunko, stabs him straight through the head with Gavant Bonavant, or however you pronounce that, which is the exact same move that Brook uses today. She does leave with her father like nothing happened, with King Luffy laying on the ground. Brook survives only because the sword somehow missed every vital spot. Main veins and the brainstem untouched. Classic One Piece miracle, very much a juxtaposition or a parallel to King Jarul, who we also see in this arc in this Elbath arc. After seeing Brook's wounds opening as he's breaking down in terror, we snap back pretty harshly to the present day, I think. Brook tells the crew he's always thought the demonic forms and the king's death were hallucinations because, quote, back then we didn't even know devil fruits existed. He repressed it so hard he convinced himself it was a nightmare. Now he's crying again, asking if he can ever trust Princess Shuri. So let's look at Brook's growth. He's finally confronting the trauma instead of running away from it. I think this is pretty good character work. And Shuri and Gunko, extremely complex now. She killed the king to end the war in Asperia, killed countless people over the probably 60 years that she had been in Mon Mayor after she had gone to the Holy Land to be a celestial dragon. She betrayed Brook brutally. There's clearly more to her story with the Holy Knights and her father. Is she a victim? I'm sure she is. Is she a monster? I'm also sure she is as well. We can definitely assume that it's both, considering that, yes, she may be a victim, considering that she had been the Domi Reversi to put her in this demonic state that definitely changed her personality. And whenever she left to become a celestial dragon with her definitely biological father, Monmere Grow, she participated definitely in a lot of those, dangerous game type scenarios that happened on God Valley, because we definitely saw Gunko murdering innocent people at God Valley. But the chapter makes her feel tragic and terrifying at the same time, and we definitely see that she had some inkling of being able to snap back to her original personality when she was telling Brook to run. Grow, being a holy knight, definitely suspected to be Gunko's biological father. The heterochromia, the different colored eyes, is definitely a family trait, and we can see that as we saw Grow's eyes for the first time in this chapter. With Princess Shuri being Domi Reversied, we have the trio doing the typical Holy Knight Celestial Dragon playbook, showing up in kingdoms, taking what they want. Emu, still the untouchable final boss. The monologue about history repeating and the Giants losing 800 years ago because they saved the children is pretty chilling, because that's exactly what's happening now. Moving on to Luffy. No long speech, he just has a similar punching panel on Emu, just like he did on St. Charlos, with the line that he had said, "Get out of Elbaf, you bastard," kind of cementing, I think, a pretty iconic scenario from back then, rehashing it now, and then it not only being on a celestial dragon or somebody from the Holy Land, but also being Emu, the prophesized or theorized final boss that we would have in the series. Moving on to the story progression and lore components that were revealed for this chapter. For the story progression, very massive, just like most of these One Piece chapters have been lately as we get into the end game, being in the final arc. Most of these are going to have very big story progressions and lore drops. Brook's entire Asperia arc is now closed, at least for now. I'm sure that we'll see more, because we still have to see him with his flashback with Yorkie, I'm sure. The Straw Hats have a personal connection to Gunko, Shuri, and the Holy Knights. This isn't just some random flashback anymore. It's tied directly to the current war. On the main stage, Emu versus Loki continues. Emu is dominating, but Loki is still standing. Then Luffy arrives, and the chapter ends on the biggest cliffhanger double spread we've seen in a while. Luffy is now directly in the fight against the literal ruler of the world. Some lore drops that we have in this chapter. The first we can see would be the world government manipulation tactics. They lied to Asperia about wanting 1,000 slaves, even though we can speculate that that might be a lie that Gunko is telling, definitely with her being in her Domi Reversi mode, but it makes sense as to them having the god traits of the heterochromia or whatever that would be in One Piece, and that Emu definitely wants those traits, or what would be considered those traits, with the families that they have in the Holy Land, sacred enough to go and try and get them back, even if it is just one person, especially being a direct descendant of a god, of a Knight of God. So them all coming there, they definitely just wanted Shuri to be handed over specifically. Classic divide and conquer and extract valuable people. The next point we'll go into are the Holy Knights operations. Grow was in Asperia years ago. The implication of how Gunko came to be is dark and fits the Celestial Dragon playbook. We definitely saw this with Ginny and Bonnie, how that happened, not knowing who it was or what family she's with, kind of speculating that it might have been Garcia, but we don't know for sure, just know that she was a Celestial Dragon. Next lore drop point we have are the Giants' history and the Void Century tie-in that we have. Emu straight up just says saving the children is what led to the Giants' defeat 800 years ago. History is repeating in Elbaf right now, so this is huge for the broader lore. The last point that we'll go over for the lore drops would be Emu's power level and philosophy. He's monologuing about repeating history while fighting a giant. The demonic transformations we saw with Shuri and the King are clearly Emu's influence, and we did see him peeking out of Marcus Mars' head, as we had seen with him doing the same thing with Garcia on God Valley. The chapter plants seeds for the bigger Void Century, Giants, Ancient Kingdom stuff, while giving us immediate payoff with Luffy entering the fight. Moving on to my final thoughts of the chapter. Just like with most, I think the last 20 chapters, this has been definitely a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 chapter, just because of everything that goes on between the story progression, the lore components, the character development, what ends up being introduced, what theory implications could be had because of information that was revealed in some of these chapters. And it delivers everything you want from a late stage One Piece chapter: the deep emotional character work, the brutal reveals, the lore that makes the world feel bigger and darker, and then pure hype with Luffy punching Emu like it's nothing. The pacing, the structure, the character moments, just like I had mentioned before, all of them great. Definitely for this chapter, but like I had said for most chapters before this as well. Brook's story was handled with so much care. That moment where he realizes he's been carrying this trauma for decades and still doesn't know if he can trust Shuri, which I get. You know, she's participated in a few genocides ever since then, over the last 60 years. That's the kind of writing that makes One Piece special, I think, though. And ending on the Luffy versus Emu, you know, that's some type of a chef's kiss there. And no break next week either, which we saw a lot during the Loki and Emu fight. Not just going between two different storylines, but also, you know, spanning between multiple chapters. So just like he's feeding Luffy, Oda's definitely feeding us as well with these last couple of chapters that we've had being so dense and lore heavy. It's not the absolute craziest chapter that we've seen, but it's extremely well executed. It sets up the next several chapters very perfectly. So what do most of you guys think? You know, is Shuri redeemable, or is she too far gone? How strong is Luffy's punch actually going to be on Emu? It should, because he's ate more. Like, the theory was that the more food he eats, the more that he can do. So he might actually be more powerful because he's been eating more. And we saw that in one of those previous chapters, that he was eating more to, I think, gain possibly more power. So we might see a lot of what Luffy ends up doing actually may affect Emu in some way. And the other thing is, what the hell did the giants do 800 years ago that involved saving the children? The only thing that I can think of is that it almost parallels, because the saying goes, history rhymes. History doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So with this, history would be repeating itself, because this implies that Emu is saying that the reason why the giants lost back in the day during the Void Century and when that ended was because the giants lost the ability because they were trying to save their children. So maybe because they weren't getting very far with trying to sway them with different means, that's when Emu just went for it and said, okay, everybody's going and we're doing this tactic right now. That way we can get this done as quickly as possible. But drop what you think about the chapter in the comments below. Next chapter is definitely going to be insane, as I'm going to say with most of these videos, because we're in the final arc. Every chapter I think is going to be insane, and the next chapter is going to, and every chapter is going to have a pretty banging cliffhanger. And we're always going to be very hyped for the next chapter, especially whenever there's no break, just like this one is. But stay safe out there and keep that One Piece spirit alive. All right, peace.